you stand, sir?
It seems to me that the environmentalists have had their way with the state of California for the last 40 years. Will judges ever stand up against the environmentalists?
I'd like to take that question because that's something near and dear to my heart, in that they drive me nuts. My house in the East County has been in the path of the last 4 major fires that have come through San Diego County, and that, I mean, so close that it's just burned on the borders of my property. God's grace, my house wasn't lost. The serious problem we have is twofold: legislature and the court. The legislature is going to make the laws. You've got to get your legislature to change the law. Then, at the same time, you have to change your judges so they will follow the law that your legislature makes. And we don't interject our own little bias about deciding that some poor little 2-inch fish is more important than the entire population of this country.
Where do the 4 of you stand on the constitutional rights of the unborn to be born?
Take it. Go ahead. Just leave it right there.
Constitutional right of the unborn to be born, absolute right, in my view. It certainly is. I'm sorry?
All 4 of you?
All 4, absolutely. Inalienable right, okay, which comes from the Creator. So we are, and we're proud to say it. We're not ashamed to say it. We're not going to be politically correct. We will put it out there.
I have absolutely no idea how this happens. How is it possible a city like San Francisco can be a sanctuary city? How can it be reversed?
Bill?
What was the question?
Repeat the question, Bill.
Repeat your question.
How can a city like San Francisco become a sanctuary city, and how can that be reversed?
And you'll know.
Yeah. The gentleman says, go to San Francisco and you'll know. We're going to take you along with us wherever we go. The idea of the sanctuary city is something that's established I think in the legislative area. From terms of the courts themselves, this is what we're talking about. There's one thing that we have to say is that we can't, we're prohibited by the Code of Judicial Ethics from talking about specific things that could come before us. And whether or not that would, I don't know. But that's one limitation that we have. The others, I think that it's going to fall into the area of the legislative branch. And as Larry intimated earlier about when we were talking about environmental issues, this would kind of fall into the same place, where once there is a law that prevents that from happening, there needs to be a judge with the backbone to stick up for what the law says, not interjecting their own point of view. So I think it's still at that twofold kind of approach.
Lady in the back.
My question is to the man at the end in the blue tie.
Speak up.
You are so opposed to the environmentalists and the animal rights activists, then how can you say that you fully represent all Republicans when you're talking to those people right now?
Go ahead. Know where she's taking.
Okay, I think that there's a slight misunderstanding about
Repeat the question.
about my response, but you have a good question that needs to be answered. If I'm so opposed, then how can I represent all of the people here when some of the people are very likely to be environmentalists? And if I'm so opposed, that would mean that I'm injecting my own bias. The question, though, that comes down the pike is, what does the legislature and the law say? When I talked about that small fish, a federal court judge stepped forward and stepped outside of the law. That fish is not part of a natural part of that water system, and it's not protected there. The judge decided to ignore the law and create a protection for that fish. That is up to the legislature to decide. The judge's job was to dismiss the lawsuit and tell people, go to your legislature and make that decision. And whether or not my bias as to whether I don't like certain things or I like certain things cannot be injected into the issue. It cannot. Now, if the law said this fish is protected, because your legislature said this fish is protected, then the judge's job is to protect it in the courtroom.
That's right. Yeah.
But it's the legislature's job to make that decision, not mine.
Gentlemen, right there.
This is for one of you or all of you. Would you allow a defense attorney before the decision on the verdict is rendered to inform the jury of jury nullification?
Okay, I practice criminal law. Let me answer that.
Let's wait it first.
Yeah.
All right, the issue has to do with jury nullification. Jury nullification is very quickly stated as when a defense attorney tells the jury that the law is immoral and wrong, and you should, even if my client's guilty of violating this law, you should ignore that and find him not guilty, him or her, because the law is wrong. And that happens in certain cases. It happens often enough that we've termed it jury nullification. You have a right to a jury trial, and it's up to the jury to make that decision as to what the jury on their of your peers makes a decision on, whether it's guilt or innocence. The question that really comes down to, is it ethical and is it legal for a defense counsel to instruct the jury that you have the right to ignore the law? That's wrong, that's illegal, that's unethical. The judge is supposed to give jury instructions explaining to the jury what the law is, what the elements of the law are, when the elements are the things that someone has to do to be in violation or not be in violation, and then you leave it to the jury. So the argument should not be raised.
Absolutely.
Lady right there.
Absolutely.
You know, Californians have voted on several propositions over several years that have passed overwhelmingly, and yet our judges tell us, no. We know better than you. Even though it's our voices, they're simply not being heard. You know, 180s, and just to name, I mean, there are several.
Ninth
But-
Court.
But I'm just, and people could yell out many more, I'm sure of it, but how can an entire state vote for something, all of your registered voters, and have something pass, and then have our judges tell us, no, not gonna happen, in our wonderful state of California?
That's the Ninth Circuit.
Folks, that hits the nail squarely on the head as to why you have to select your judges. You know, we're a nation of law, not of men. All right? And if the law, the people have legislated. There's two ways to legislate laws: through a legislative body, the legislature, or by initiative of the people, the referendum, propositions that you vote on. And our legislators don't enact the laws they want. We, the people, do so. And judges are bound to follow the law and to apply it. And that's one of the most fundamental roles. Now, you will read out there in the press that we are being branded as these conservative, right-wing people who are a threat to the independence of the judiciary. I will tell you that because of what we're doing and trying to return the judiciary to you so that you can elect judges who will uphold the will of the people. That's exactly what this election is all about.
Well, I
What do we do about that?
this because the other gentleman that just spoke talked about that small little fish that has cut down and almost shut down our farming communities completely up in Northern California. If a judge is the person that made that decision and not a legislator, what is the legal recourse for that, to have that judge removed or to simply have that overturned so that our farming communities can farm again?
Well, it would, what it would go is have to go up on appeal, but what we're suggesting is that if you get the right judges in place, we can probably short circuit a lot of that. Because, you know, folks, these are very, very complex battles, and even though we have three branches of government, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary, the truth of the matter is these issues end up where? in the courts. They end up in the courts. And where do you have the least say in terms of who you select to be your decision maker? You've got the least say on the judicial side of government. And that's why that all needs to change. So you can put judges in place who will be faithful to the Constitution, who will follow the law, and we shouldn't have to have these endless rounds of appeal and look to other mechanisms to remove judges who are not faithful to the Constitution. Does that kind of address your question?
I'm about to remove the judge.
Yeah,